Screen. Everybody see?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, perfect. All right. So everybody, welcome to the November meeting of North Texas AHRMM. I'm Taylor Van Allen. I'm the education chair, and the voice you just heard is Mary Alexander. She's a past president. We're going to move pretty quickly today. We have about an hour and quite a bit to cover in the Excel training. A couple things to kick off. Firstly, if you would like to join a committee for next year, the committee members here are listed. If you have a specific committee that you'd like to join, please reach out to any of the people that you see on this list. Alternately, you can send us an email to northtexasarm@gmail.com if you don't happen to have the email addresses for these individuals. So other than that, we do also want to remind you that we have a resource library available through the North Texas AHRMM website. You can go to northtexasarm.org. There's a red button here for the new resource library, and it has some great resources for certifications and also has links to our page, the National AHRMM page, and then our YouTube page as well. So on the North Texas AHRMM page, navigate to that new resource library button. And for anybody just joining or wanting to know, yes, this session is being recorded. And we will post it to our North Texas AHRMM YouTube channel, which on the resource library, it's this first link all the way over here to the right. Click that, it will take you to our page. We have uploaded last month's meeting for October, where we went through some Excel tips and tricks, some formulas, Excel tables, and VLOOKUP formula as well. It will have the link for the download files, which is a Google Drive link that you can download, and it'll be listed in the description of the video. So if you have any suggestions on anything that you'd like to add to the resource library, if you found anything useful, send us an email at northtexasarm@gmail.com. You can also click the link there in the library and it will open that email up for you. All right, without further ado, let's get into Excel for supply chain, intro to pivot tables, and Power Query. As I mentioned, there was a download link, and Jimmy, I sent you the zip file in the email just now.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. If you haven't seen it, there is a download link in the meeting invite. It will download a zip file that has all of these wonderful files in it. I don't know if you can really see this, but it'll have the main file that we're looking at today, which is our North Texas AHRMM Excel training, November 2021. It has a contract list file, a couple issue transactions files. This is just some example of raw data that you might get. A folder of issue transactions as well, and we'll talk more about that once we get into the Power Query section of our presentation today. And then also some bonus files for pivot tables. So if you're just starting out with pivot tables, if you've never even used one before, never even heard of one before, this is where you're going to start at 01 pivot tables, and then its companion file when you start getting a little bit more familiar with pivot tables. The second one picks up right where this first one leaves off. All right, so actually I need to open this one, this main file, North Texas AHRMM, November 2021 Excel training. And I'm going to turn my video off here real quickly. Otherwise, you're just going to see my neck quite a bit. Oh, accidentally stopped sharing. Here we go. All right. Can everybody see my screen again? Sorry about that.
Yes.
I'm hoping that you can. Okay, great. Okay, great. All right, so today we are talking about pivot tables and Power Query. Again, if you have never once used a pivot table, never used Power Query, never even heard of it, you are in the right place. Starting off, what are pivot tables used for? When you want to quickly summarize your data, as this explains, what should you do? Shout it out. Pivot. You should pivot your stuff. Thank you. Appreciate it. So we have an example of a data set here. This is some sample data for Thanksgiving dinner. We've got some family members, we got some food items, we got a count of helpings. Looks like everybody's starting off with the same stuff. And as we go throughout the day, some people are going back for seconds, thirds, stuff like that. So we have a log of this in the data. We have some questions that we want to answer. So who had the most helpings of mashed potatoes? Who had the most helpings of pumpkin pie? This is a small data set comparatively to a lot of the stuff that you're probably used to. It's only got 3 columns and I think about 20, 30 rows, something like that, which is, yeah, as I said, considerably smaller than a lot of the data that we're used to. But the principles that we use in this, if you have 30 rows or 3,000 rows or 300,000 rows of data, you could still use a pivot table to summarize all of that data. So first things first, how do we get this data set here into a pivot table? Anybody know off the top of their head, have you used pivot tables before? If not, I will show you. Don't worry. Oh, I misnumbered these. Whoops. 2, 4, and 5. Sorry about that. So we will highlight the data off to the left. And if anybody needs me to pause or go back if I'm moving a little bit too quick, please do let me know. I'm going to highlight this data off to the left. I'm going to go up to the Insert tab at the top. Click Insert here. And there's a handy dandy little button for a pivot table. What this is going to do is summarize my data. It's going to take the entire data set. It's going to do the little dancing ants, these little green lines around here, and highlight my entire data set. And I am going to, rather than placing this pivot table onto a new worksheet, I'm going to put it on an existing worksheet, drop it right here. Click OK, and it's going to create a pivot table, which is now connected to this data set that we just looked at. Over here on the right-hand side, you'll see that there's a new menu that pops up for pivot table fields. It reads the column headers here and then displays them rather than left to right, displays them vertically. So in order to summarize this data, I would highly recommend to any of you that are not familiar with pivot tables, just drag and drop stuff, see what happens. There's nothing that you can do that's going to ruin any of the data in here. You're not going to overwrite anything. You're not going to break anything. So in this instance, these directions say that I want to find out who had the most helpings of mashed potatoes, who had the most helpings of pumpkin pie. What I'm going to do is take my helpings as my values, my food item, my rows, and my family members into the column section. And it is just as easy as clicking, dragging, and dropping them in. Once I drop in the food items, I now have a list, a unique list of all the items that are in my food item column. When I put in family members into the columns section, now I have a table that has a cross section of my rows of food items, columns of my family members. When I take my helpings, which is a numerical data type, I'll put that in my values section. of my pivot table. And now, based on this being a numerical data type by default, it's going to add all of the rows together that have this specific cross section. So the ant only took one helping of cranberry sauce, one helping of mashed potatoes, two of pumpkin pie, one of stuffing, and one of turkey. And we have kind of a grid or matrix of these values that is summed up using this whole list. So to answer this question, the first question that we have here, who can answer who had the most helpings of mashed potatoes based on this pivot table that we've just put together? Feel free to shout it out.
Uncle.
That's correct. That is correct. So if I choose uncle, I now have something out to the side that shows me whether that is correct. If you had chosen something else, it would have told you to try again. So, second question, who had the most helpings of pumpkin pie? Here's the
Brother.
Yes, correct. Thank you. Appreciate the participation.
Trying to help a brother out.
Thank you, Elena. So you can see that, again, this is a smaller data set, but we were able to summarize a lot of this information very quickly. A lot of this is going to be based on a sum. If you had a text data type, it would count instead, which we'll see in a later example. But just a real quick intro to pivot tables using a data set, answering some questions that we might have. And if this were a purchase order data set or a data set on issues from the warehouse to a par location or something like that, you may have some slightly different questions, but the principles are in fact the same. So they are transferable. All right, any questions about pivot tables? Any specific things that if you have used a pivot table, you're kind of struggling to figure out, or things that you found useful about using a pivot table? If not, I will move on to Power Query. But you can see the value in using a pivot table. I know we went over it during the last session as well when I think it was maybe 1,500 lines of spend data. We were able to summarize that by month and by item. So if nobody has any questions, I will move toward Power Query. All right, I'm going to take that as a no. So moving on to Power Query. If you have never heard of Power Query, again, you are in the right place. Has anybody heard of or used Power Query that is on this call? Again, feel free to come off mute, type something in the chat. Nope?
Nope.
All right, cool. Then we have some stuff to learn. And pivot tables are fantastic. However, the real bang for your buck here is in Power Query. As you can see from the icons, it is part of Excel and part of the Power BI engine as well. So there is a lot of crossover, learning Power BI in Excel learning Power Query in Excel and then learning it in Power BI. It is highly transferable. The main thing that Power Query does is allows you to connect to multiple data sources inside of Excel and externally to Excel. You can connect to other Excel files, a table within the current Excel file, CSVs, PDFs even for contracts folks. If you have a contract with a bunch of pricing tables in your PDFs, you can connect straight to that and import it into your Excel files. You also have the option to connect directly to databases. So your SQL servers, your Oracle servers, so forth, your IBM servers. So if you write queries, you can connect directly to a database in Excel and then have it play the results in an Excel table. So aside from getting your data, you can also do data cleansing and data transformations, which we'll see here in a little bit, based on some fantastic functionality in a Power Query editor. And then once you've done your cleaning, transformations, things like that, you can load your data into a different, into several different options, either an Excel table, or if you want to, you can load it directly to a pivot table or a pivot chart. Or if you only want to be able to connect to the data, you can do that and connect to the data model, which that's kind of a little bit more into the advanced side of Power Query. So today we're going to just look at connecting to some Excel files and a table inside of this current Excel document. All right, any questions on that so far? If not, we will move on to the first example of Power Query and how it works. All right, moving on. So the first example, as I mentioned, Power Query is built into some of the later versions of Excel. If you have Excel 2010 or 2013, you may have to install Power Query as an add-in. But if you have the Excel 2016 version or later, it has been placed into this data tab here up top under the Get and Transform Data section over here off to the left. So the main part of this is this off to the way far left says Get Data, and then you have a bunch of options of how you can connect to different data sources. Just a real quick overview. You can connect to an Excel workbook, text or CSV file. There are also XML and JSON if you are so inclined to do that, or directly to a PDF or a folder of files, which is really helpful when you have the same structure of report, maybe month over month or quarter over quarter. It's very helpful, and we will see an example of that. It's our third example during the exercises that we have today. Also, you can connect directly to a SharePoint folder if you have SharePoint in your organization. And as I mentioned before, you can also connect to SQL Server database, Oracle, IBM, Microsoft Access if you have a database in Access as well. And then a few other databases as well. On top of that, Azure, if your organization has upgraded from SQL Server to Azure, you do have connectors there as well. And you can even go to a SharePoint online list. You can connect to Microsoft Exchange, which is your engine for Microsoft Outlook. And then if you have Microsoft Dynamics 365 or Salesforce, you can connect to those. And even from the web. So if you're trying to pull in data, I think the most frequent example I see of this is people pulling table information off of Wikipedia as an example, but it's pretty much any web page that has a table of information. So with that, we will dive into the first example, which we are going to take this very messy data set that has a whole bunch of extra white space in an Excel table. We are going to connect to this, and then we are going to display the results here after trimming out all this extra white space. So again, coming up here to the very top, to the data tab, I can either, since I know I want to connect to a table or range, and this is an Excel table titled PQ Table Items, I can either connect directly to that with this little button right here, or again, I can go to Get Data from other sources and then from table range. Since I'm clicked into this table, it's going to recognize that I am in fact connected to an Excel table. Let me move up this Power Query editor window. This is the Power Query editor. It looks very similar to Excel. You'll see a little bit of code up here. Don't worry about that. You don't have to know how to code anything at all in order to use Power Query. It's going to detect my table here, and then it's going to track whatever changes I make on this right-hand side under the applied steps. Since I did name my table, it's just going to copy that name, PQ table items here. If I hadn't named it or just left it as table 1, it would show up as table 1. I can always rename it. But looking at the source step, it's reading from my current Excel workbook and finding a table named PQ table items. And then there's this funny thing that Excel does where it tries to detect the data types that I have. So if I click back here, you can see that I have a whole bunch of extra white space still. Then it tries to detect, oh, these look like numbers. So I'm just going to go ahead and assume that that's what you want. Sometimes that is great. Other times it is very unhelpful. So if you have numbers with leading zeros, for example, or item numbers that are maybe alphanumeric, sometimes if it just sees a number and you want it to treat it as alphanumeric or as a text data type, it will try to automatically convert it to a number. In this instance, I don't want that. So I can just click that little X that was right next to it and get rid of that step. Instead, one thing that I want to do is to remove all the white space. I want to trim that out. And luckily for us, there is a very easy button. I'm going to come up here to the Transform tab and then navigate all the way over here to Text column, since that is the data type that I want to use. And then click on that drop-down menu. And there is a trim function. I don't have to know how to get rid of white space using a formula. I can just use Power Query instead. When I click that, all of the extra white space that was in this column is now gone. I can do the same thing to the item description, trim, and now I have a very tidy, small data set. And I'm going to load this. I'm going back to the Home tab here. I'm going to press Close and Load to. If I press Close and Load, it's just going to automatically, by default, create a brand new sheet in my Excel document. I don't necessarily want that. I want to have the option to load it to something else. Here, it's going to ask me if I want to load it to an Excel table. And again, it shows by default, it's going to try to put it on a new worksheet. I don't necessarily want that. I want to put it on the existing worksheet right here in F10. But when I click OK, now I have a transformed data set. Doesn't have all that extra white space. And anything new that I add to the bottom, since this is in fact an Excel table, if I type in a whole bunch of spaces, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, bunch of spaces, and then a bunch of spaces here, sample item, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, bunch of spaces. Here's one of the great things about Power Query. Originally, I had 6 rows here. Now that I've added something to this data set, I don't have to go and try to do all that again. I can either right click in this table and click refresh, or I can come over here, my queries and connections, and click refresh here, or right click it here and click refresh, whichever one you feel most comfortable with. And it automatically picks up, oh, there's another row here. Let me just go ahead and add it to this table. So as you have new data, again, in your editor, I go to back to editing this query. it remembers all the steps that I have. In this instance, I only have 2 steps. I'm bringing in the data, I'm trimming out all the white space. But other transformations that I do have, which we'll see here in a little bit, it remembers all of these steps. And as I add in new data, I don't have to go back and do all that work again. I can just load directly and hit refresh. And it will do all the same transformation steps. So, any questions about that example? Any comments? Do you see any way that you could use this in the future?
Oh yeah, this will be totally useful for when the model numbers are not the same format or extra stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can change the data types too. As we saw, it tried to detect that one was going to be an int or whole number value and changing it to a text data type. You can, if you wanted to, change it to something else as well. So if I go back and edit this, you can either click this little ABC icon that's a text data type, or you can come up to the very top here in the Home tab, and there's a data type dropdown as well. Same options. So if any of these were some other data type, if I wanted to make them currency instead, it would change them into a currency value, and you'll see the icon there as well. If I want to reorder these steps, I can drag it up. And if you hit an error after having done so, oh no, what am I going to do? Let me just drag it back down. And I'm all set. Or I can just get rid of it. Again, one of the great things about Power Query is this concept of abstracting the data. Basically, I'm reading in a copy of it and making whatever transformations I want to make. But I'm not editing anything from the actual original data set. I'm only reading this in, making my transformations inside of Power Query, and then loading it somewhere. All right, so that is our first example. That is removing some white space using a table inside the current document. Second example that we're going to use today is to connect to an Excel file that is not in this current Excel. In the download files that you've gotten, there is a file for contract list. We are going to connect to this, and I'm going to filter it into 2 separate lists, or tables rather. One that has expired contracts and one that has active contracts. So in order to do that, again, I'm going to come up here to my data tab. I'm all the way over here to the left, click get data. I'm going to choose from workbook, which is another Excel file. If I hover over this, it'll say import data from an Excel book. So I'll click that. I'm going to navigate to the download files that I have here. I'm going to click contract list, and I'm going to import that information. Because I have an external file here, the file name will be here in this little folder, and then it's going to detect a sheet that I've named contracts, get a little preview of the data that's involved in that. And if I wanted to, if I felt like all of this was perfectly clean and tidy, I could immediately load this data into a brand new sheet. And if you click load, that's what it's going to do. I also have the option to load it to a specific location, but I will typically say, unless you know for a fact that this data is perfect, opt for the transform data option. And even if you don't know, you can always look at it, check, or if you want to add anything, go for transform data, give it a once over. So once I click that, I am back in the Power Query menu, or Power Query editor rather. The table that I have is named, or contracts based on the sheet that I was in. And then Excel has done some extra work here and tracked 4 steps. It has gone to the source, which was my my specific file path, and read in this information. It pulled all of that in, and then it promotes the first row to the headers, making it look like a much neater, nicer table here. And then again, Excel has detected and said, hey, I think I know what you want for your data types. In this case, it's actually correct, but unless you know that for sure, you can always change them afterward, but it's going to try to detect what it thinks that you want. In this case, I do want my contract number to be a text data type, which you can see by the ABC here. Contract name, it's just going to be contract, and then the contract number here. I know not very super descriptive, but for the sample data set. And then I have a start date and an end date here. So in order to split these into active contracts and inactive contracts, what I would need to do is look at my end date and see if any of these have expired. So these, I have all the individual contract dates here. I know these 2016s, 2017s, 2018s up until the current date, those are all expired. And those are probably ones that I'm going to want to go target to either renew or check to see if they've been replaced. So how do we do that? Well, here's some extra functionality inside of the Power Query editor. I can add a column. You guys there? Can you
We're
see
here.
my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Sorry, my screen just flashed and I was like, oh no, did I drop off the call? Okay, good. Excellent. So now I can add a column in here to grab the current date, evaluate that against the end date, and then I'll add another column that will allow me to see whether or not something is expired. So adding this new column, I have a few options here. One I'm going to want to use to add the current date is custom column. I'm going to click that. And then I get this little menu here. It says custom column. It automatically defaults to the new column name being custom. And then I have, oh, actually, no, sorry, I don't want to use that one. I want to invoke a custom function. That's what I want. Pardon. So, no, my screen isn't updating here. Pardon. I can only see part of it. Hopefully this works. Okay. There we go. Okay. Excuse me. It is under custom column. So I'm going to look for the current date, and the way that I'm going to look for that is by typing in the now keyword. There's a whole bunch of extra functions that come up. The one I really want is the datetime local now. This is the most code that we will look at today. So I can pull in a custom value here. So this is going to be the current date. And I'm going to add this on to the end of my columns. Here we go, current date. Again, it's detecting here that it wants a text, or actually this is a general data type. I don't need the date time. I only really want the date. So I'm going to click that and choose date instead and overwrite that data type. So now that I have the current day on here, I can evaluate this against the end date and get another column that tells me whether or not these items have been expired. The way I'm going to do that is up here under add column, I'm going to do a conditional column because I have one of two outcomes. Either the current date is after the end date, meaning it's expired, or it's before the end date, meaning it's not expired. So add column, conditional column. Again, it's going to show custom here. This I want to change to expiration status. And here, when I click this drop down, it's going to give me the option to select another column. So I'm going to see if the end date is after. I have the option here, either I can type in a value or I can select another column. In this case, I want to select a column. The end date is after the current date, then I don't necessarily need to see anything, but I can type in a value for not expired. Otherwise, meaning the date is the end date is before the current date, I want to see the value expired. I click OK. Now it's going to evaluate all of these contracts that I've got here, showing either an expired or not expired status, which is great. Now I know reading in from an external file, I've added in a current date and an expiration status. In this example, I only want to pull back my active contracts. So I'm now going to filter on this newly created column for not expired. I click OK. Now I have only the active contracts. And I can actually get rid of these two columns. I'm going to highlight both of them. Come back to the Home tab and remove these. Here are all of my active contracts. Can rename this query, close and load to existing sheet right here in B10. Click OK. Here are my active contracts. Isn't that nice? So how do I go back and get my list of expired contracts then? Here's one of the other great things about Power Query. I can duplicate this query and just change the last couple steps if I want to. The way I do that, right-click my active contracts, down here to duplicate, change the name on this to expired contracts. Come up to this step where I evaluated I only wanted not expired. I can click this little gear icon. Instead of not expired, I want expired specifically. One that didn't take. There we go. And then repeating my step to remove the current date and expiration status, close and load to. I want to load to G10. I've got side-by-side tables here. I can see from my end dates, they were earlier than today, that these are my expired contracts. I come up here, these function just like Excel tables, so I can change the style, change my active contracts to green, change my expired to red, so I know that I can read these. If I updated any of these, any of the contracts in the list, again, I could refresh and it would re-import this, having run through all those transformation steps again. since we evaluated against the current date too as a variable, as these expire over time, past, so for example, I don't know if any of these are in the next couple. Yeah, here we go. So this contract here expires at the end of the year. These two do. So if I came in January 1st, 2022 and hit refresh, these are going to jump over from this table into this table now. So again, Power Query, very helpful, especially as you have new data or refreshed data coming in. I know we just ran over quite a bit in that one, so I'll pause for some questions here. Anybody have anything? Any remarks? If not, I will move on to the next example.
Yeah, I'm monitoring chat, Taylor, and I don't see anything there either.
Okay. All right, so we will move on to the next example. I know, again, this is a lot to take in. I would highly recommend that you practice some of the stuff. We are recording this session, so we will post it to our YouTube channel. If you're not comfortable with Power Query yet, or just kind of soaking it all in, there is a bit of a learning curve there. So just follow along with the download files and rewatch the video. Hopefully it'll make sense, and you'll get the outcome that you're looking for. All right, third example, and I know we've got about 15 minutes left here. So this one, we are now going to connect to a folder of Excel files, which is great. And then we're going to drop in 2 more Excel files and refresh. You can see how maybe if you have the same output report month over month, that all you have to do is drop it in a folder and click refresh, and it will make your life much easier. So in this case, Power Query again, coming to the data tab up here at the very top, I'm going to connect to get data. I'm going to come to from file, and I'm going to choose from folder. In this instance, I want to go to my folder of issue transactions. Open that. I currently have 3 files in here. Let me open that up so you can see what I do have in here. So issue transactions, I have issue transactions from the warehouse to a PAR location for July, August, and September. I have 3 files in there. So I'm going to connect to all those. I also have 2 that are currently sitting outside of that folder for October and November that I will then drop into this file after we've created the Power Query that connects to it. And then we'll refresh the data that will then bring in October and November. So let's see how that works. When I have multiple files inside of a folder, I have a new option here. Rather than just loading and transforming the data, I have the option to combine, or if I click the little drop down, combine and transform, combine and load too. Again, go with transform data until you know for sure that everything's good to go. And even if you feel like double, triple checking, I'm going to click combine and transform data. But right now, it's looking through all of those files inside that folder. I have the same structure of my output. So they're all going to be on a tab called issue transactions. They're all going to have the same columns. They're going to be a different number of rows, but they'll all have the same exact structure here. I have transaction dates, IDs, transaction types, PAR location ID, PAR location name, item number, item description, UOM, and the quantity that got issued to that PAR location. So I'm going to click OK to pull that into the Power Query editor, and there's going to be a whole bunch of extra stuff on the right-hand side for Excel to have run through all of this information. Additionally, there's going to be a whole bunch of extra stuff on the Power Query window on the queries section over here off to the left. For now, I'm just going to minimize that. I can see that there's an extra column here for the file that this is coming from, which is great. I have a few hundred transactions here from July, and then I start to see all the ones from August, and then I should have some from September as well, once I get kind of a little further down in here. So I have hundreds of transactions from July, August, and September. I am going to get rid of the file names here. I'm going to remove that column. But what I'm really after is just everything that was in each one of those files. I don't necessarily need the file name. So what I'm doing is taking all the July, August, and September transactions. I'm combining them all together, even though they are separate files, into a single Power Query. And there's a few things that I want to do. I have a transaction date here. I want to pull out the year and the month. And I can do that by adding a column, add column up here at the top of this tab. Here's one of the most powerful things about Power Query. This column from examples. I have the transaction date highlighted. I can click column from examples and click from selection since I have this column selected. And then it allows me to type what I want to see based on this current column. So right here, I want to pull out the year. So I can just type in 2021, hit enter, and it automatically detects, oh, you want the year? Let me go ahead and rename that for you. I don't have to know any formulas at all in order to do that. So yes, it has predicted what I wanted correctly. I'm going to click OK. And now it has added this step to insert a new column with the year from my transaction date. I want to do the same thing now using column from examples from selection. And I want to pull out the month number. So if I just type in 7 and hit enter, now it pulls out the month number. And again, successfully determines what I wanted, renames it month. I can click OK. Now I have that. Now I want to go pull out the month name. So if I, again, highlight transaction date, column from examples from the selected column that I have here, I can just type out July and click enter. And it knows, oh, you want the month name now. And it will read that all the way down, even including my August and September information. Isn't that handy? Lastly, I want to now pull out the floor number out of the middle of this par location name. I want to pull out floor 6, floor 7, floor 2, floor 3 as a new column. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to come to add column, column from examples, from selection. Normally, in order to get this, I'd have to have some pretty complicated formula looking for the first space after a dash and the first leading up to the first comma. Not with Power Query. I can literally just type in the words floor 6 and hit enter. And it figures out that formula for me. I don't need to know that formula. Rather than it figuring out exactly what I want it to be called, it just says text from delimiters, but I can double click that and write out floor number instead, hit enter, click OK, and look at that. I now have a floor number extracted. No formulas necessary. Now I have a really good data set here. And I want to be able to close this. I have my issue transactions name here. I'm going to close and load to, and I'm going to load it right here. Normally, I would just load it as a table. However, I also have the option to go directly to a pivot table, which I'm going to use. So I'm going to load to a pivot table in the existing worksheet right here into B10. Click OK. All of those extra columns that I just added, floor number, and this is sorted alphabetically, so that's why they're not at the end here. I have floor number, I have the month, I have the month name, and I have the year. So if I wanted to see the count of transactions by month, I could pull in month name here, pull in my transaction ID, or and since this is a numerical data type, it is going to automatically assume that I want it to sum all of these together. Instead, I'm going to click this little this little arrow off to the right and click value field settings. And instead of choosing a sum, I want to count the number of transactions that I've had by month. So I'm going to choose count, click OK. Here's how many transactions I've had each month. One of the very cool things about Power Query is now for July, August, and September, I have this information. Somebody gives me a brand new report in October. I'm going to move this into this folder. And then right click in my pivot table, click refresh. All of those transformation steps have been completed on the new file. It's rechecking all the files that exist in that folder. If I took July out, it would only have August, September, and October now. If I go back and add in November, drop that in for the next month, all I have to do is come back to this pivot table, click refresh again. Yes, it is awesome and a massive time saver. Because it has remembered all of the transformation steps that I have done, I have now saved myself that much time from having to do it every month. That is the power of Power Query. I know we only have a couple of minutes left here. So real quickly, I'm just going to transform this into a chart, which will be very nice. Show this in tabular form without subtitles so you can see month name, counter transaction ID. And because I'm in a pivot table, this also, much like an Excel table, has its own context menu for pivot table analyze. It also has an option here to add in a pivot chart over here off to the right. So since I'm in this pivot table, I can drop in a chart and it automatically detects, hey, maybe you want this one. Maybe you want this column chart. Isn't that great? So issue transactions by month. And then just some quick tidying here. Adding some data labels on the end. Ta-da. Questions, comments, concerns? You can come off mute. We've only got like 3 minutes left.
That really will save a lot of time, Taylor.
Glad to hear it.
Yeah.
So when you have something like this, if you have a report and you're connected to a folder, just save your report and then drop your new file in. Hit refresh, save it, send it off. You're done. Ta-da!
Great. Yeah. Thank you.
Of course. All right, we've reached the end of our meeting. I am going to throw it back over to Mary. I don't know where my screen share is, but hopefully you guys can still see this. If you have anything else for future Excel trainings that you would like to learn, please do send us an email at northtexasarm@gmail.com. Thank you to everybody who has already sent a message, your questions, and then things that you want to see in future topics and suggestions for the resource library. I really appreciate it. And then since we are about a week away, happy Thanksgiving as well. If you have any questions, again, please let me know. If you don't have any right now, or you want to ask privately, go to northtexasarm@gmail.com. Send me an email there, rather. And then also, just as a reminder, we do have a meeting next month as well in December, on December 16th. I believe it's scheduled for 5 to 6 p.m., but of course, you'll see the meeting invites coming up. And lastly, we do have a meeting survey coming out this Friday. So please make sure to fill that out. We appreciate the feedback, and I think that's it. Back to you, Mary.
Thank you, Taylor. So we'll have this recording on file. I'm stopping this part now.